A bird declared extinct in the wild is being bred in Germany and released into Brazil, but the scientists doing it know that the birds going back are genetically different from the ones that vanished. Welcome to the science of the unexplained. I want to take you on a journey through what it means to save a species. Because the deeper you look at this story, the less certain the word saved becomes. In October 2000, in a strip of dry forest no wider than a city block in the state of Bahia, the last known wild Spix's macaw disappeared. No gunshot, no collector's net. It simply wasn't there one morning, and it never came back. You've probably assumed that extinction means a species is gone forever. Here's what the evidence actually shows. The Spix's macaw is being bred right now in a facility in Germany, and birds are already being released into Brazil. But the scientists running that program know something they don't say loudly. The birds going back are not genetically identical to the ones that left, so the question isn't whether the Spix's macaw can return. The question is whether what returns is still the Spix's macaw. The Spix's macaw, Cyanopsitta spixii, was never common. Even before the 20th century, its entire known range was a single gallery forest corridor along the Rio São Francisco in Bahia, Brazil. That's not a biome, that's an address. Ornithologist Johann Baptist von Spix collected the first specimen in 1819. By the time serious field surveys began in the 1980s, researchers couldn't find a breeding population anywhere, not declining, functionally absent. When ornithologist Charles Munn and colleagues conducted surveys in the late 1980s, they located fewer than 5 individuals in the wild, 5 birds, for an entire species. What had pushed them to that edge? The answer involves deforestation, the illegal wildlife trade, and the near-total loss of the Caraíba tree, Tabebuia aurea, on which the macaw depended almost exclusively for nesting. But here's the detail that should stop you. By 1990, there was one confirmed wild individual left, and conservation authorities knew this, and still couldn't agree on what to do about it. How does a species collapse to a single animal while scientists are watching? And what does that tell us about the decade of decisions that followed? By 1990, that single wild male had been banded and was under observation. He had done something unexpected. He paired with a female Iligas macaw, a different species entirely, apparently in the absence of any surviving female of his own kind. This wasn't sentimentality. It was biology finding the only available path. The pair was documented nesting. The interspecific pairing produced no viable offspring, but it told researchers something important. This bird was behaviorally intact, still driven to reproduce, still occupying its ecological niche. Then, in 1995, a captive-bred female Spix's macaw was released near his territory. The footage from that period, documented in Tony Juniper's 2002 book Spix's Macaw, The Race to Save the World's Rarest Bird, shows the male redirecting his attention toward the female almost immediately. For a few months, observers believed they were watching the beginning of a recovery. The female disappeared within weeks, cause unknown. Possibly a power line, possibly predation. The record doesn't say. The male continued alone. Then, in October 2000, he was gone too. No carcass, no signal from his band, just absence. BirdLife International formally relisted Cyanopsitta spixii as extinct in the wild in their 2019 assessment, nearly 2 decades after that last sighting. In the intervening years, roughly 60 to 80 birds had been maintained in captive breeding programs, primarily in Europe and the Middle East, descended from individuals collected, mostly illegally, before any protection existed. The Association for the Conservation of Threatened Parrots, known as ACTP, took primary custodianship and began preparing for the step everyone agreed was necessary and almost nobody agreed was ready: reintroduction to Bahia. But the birds being prepared for release had spent generations in captivity. They had never heard the specific acoustic environment of the Caatinga. They had never foraged for themselves, and their genetics told a story the program couldn't fully resolve. Here is what conservation geneticists actually know, and what they don't. The captive population of Spix's macaws descends from a small founder group, almost certainly fewer than a dozen wild-caught individuals captured before the 1980s. Dr. Cristiana Soria Carrasco and colleagues at institutions including the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute have published work on the genetic diversity challenges facing single-founder bottleneck species in captive programs. The Spix's macaw captive population shows the expected signature of that bottleneck: reduced heterozygosity, elevated inbreeding coefficients relative to what a wild population of even modest size would carry. The ACTP's breeding program, in coordination with Brazilian environmental agency IBAMA and the Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, ICMBio, has worked to manage pairings and minimize further inbreeding. By the time initial reintroductions to Bahia began in 2022, the first release of captive-bred Spix's macaws into their historic range in over 2 decades, the program reported a captive population exceeding 180 individuals. That number sounds like success. But here is where the science gets genuinely contested. Behavioral ecologists argue that captive-bred parrots lack the learned cultural knowledge a wild population accumulates across generations: foraging routes, predator responses, the specific vocalizations that function as social glue in group-living citizens. Dr. Donald Brightsmith, ornithologist at Texas A&M University and one of the world's leading parrot reintroduction researchers, has documented in studies of other parrot species that captive-bred individuals show significantly higher early mortality than wild-caught counterparts released into native habitat, not because of genetics, but because of behavioral naivety. The Spix's macaw reintroduction team knows this. Their response has been a soft release protocol, acclimatization aviaries in Bahia, managed feeding stations, gradual exposure to the Caatinga environment. Whether that protocol is sufficient is not yet known. Early reports from the 2022 releases indicate some birds have survived, some have not. The data is not yet published in peer-reviewed form, and underneath all of it sits a question that no protocol can fully answer. The Caraíba woodland, the last wild male called home in 2000, is not the same woodland being prepared for these birds today. Habitat restoration in the Melancia Creek region has been underway, led by ACTP in partnership with Brazilian authorities, replanting thousands of Caraíba trees. But a restored forest is not a recovered ecosystem. The invertebrate communities, the fungal networks, the mosaic of microhabitats a species refines over thousands of years, those cannot be planted. So even if the birds survive, even if they breed, the conservation community faces a question it has not resolved. At what point does a reintroduced population become a new wild population, distinct from the one we lost? And does the distinction matter? Here is what this story has actually taught us. The Spix's macaw didn't go extinct because nobody cared. It went extinct in the wild while being watched, documented, and mourned in real time. The victim of decisions made decades before conservation biology had the tools to intervene effectively, and of a habitat so specific that losing it meant losing everything. The birds being released in Bahia today are real Spix's macaws by taxonomy, by morphology, by every classification we have. They are also something the last wild male never was. Birds born in captivity, shaped by human management, returning to a forest that is itself being reconstructed. That isn't a failure. It may be the best we can do, but it forces a question worth sitting with. If the birds released in Bahia establish a breeding population, but their genetic diversity and behavioral repertoire are measurably narrower than the wild population we lost, Does that count as saving the Spix's macaw, or as building the closest approximation we could manage? Those are not the same thing, and the answer changes what we owe every species still on the edge right now. Something else went extinct while we were focused on a single bird in a single forest. That story is still being counted.